He arrived at the school every morning before the first bell rang. The hallways were quiet, and the air smelled faintly of floor polish and the morning dew from outside. The janitor moved slowly but with purpose, pushing his cart from classroom to classroom, tidying up after the night's work. His hands, worn and rough, carried the marks of decades of labor, yet his movements were gentle when handling the delicate things around the school. Most students barely noticed him. They waved a quick hello or nodded as they hurried past on their way to class. Teachers appreciated his work, but few stopped to talk. He was a quiet presence, always there, always helpful, but invisible in a way that only those who truly paid attention could see. Despite this, he never complained or sought attention. He enjoyed his routine, the small details of keeping the school clean, and the soft hum of life around him. The janitor had been at this school for more than 40 years. When he first started, the school was smaller, with fewer students and teachers. He remembered watching children grow, seeing them graduate, and occasionally seeing them return years later to visit. Many had forgotten him, but he remembered each face, each personality, each story. He knew the laughter and the tears that had passed through these halls, and the school felt like a living thing to him, familiar and comforting. But there was more to him than the broom and mop. Beneath the worn shoes and faded uniform, he carried a secret. Long ago, before life demanded he take on responsibility, he had music in his soul. He had played the piano with a skill that drew applause and admiration. He had dreamed of stages, of bright lights and full halls, of music carrying him into the world. But life had other plans. Family obligations and the need for steady work had pulled him away from concerts and lessons. Music became a quiet friend, hidden in the corners of his mind, something he carried silently through the years. Today, like any other day, he pushed his cart down the hallway, wiping smudges from the windows and sweeping dust into neat piles. The students were beginning to arrive, their chatter and laughter filling the air. Some carried backpacks too heavy for their small frames. Some hurried with last-minute homework tucked under arms. They paid little attention to him, and he did not expect them to. He simply enjoyed the rhythm of the morning, the calm before the bustle of lessons and bells. As he passed the music room, he paused. The door was slightly ajar, and he could hear faint notes coming from inside. A student was practicing, hitting keys awkwardly, trying to make the tune come alive. He leaned against the doorframe, watching quietly. There was something beautiful in the effort, in the focus and determination of the student, and it stirred something in him he hadn't felt in a long time. His fingers itched with the memory of playing, of sliding across keys, of letting the music flow through him like water. He shook his head slightly and continued his rounds. There was work to do, floors to sweep, classrooms to tidy. Yet, the sound of music stayed with him as he cleaned. He moved with care, noticing small things others might overlook. A crumpled paper on the floor, a marker left uncapped, a chair out of place. Each little task was done with precision, a quiet dedication that reflected a mind used to discipline and attention. There was artistry even in cleaning if one looked closely, and he found a strange satisfaction in it. At lunch, he ate alone in the corner of the staff room. Teachers came and went, talking about meetings, grades, and upcoming events. Occasionally, one would ask him how long he had worked at the school, and he would answer simply with a soft smile and a shrug. He did not need recognition, and he did not seek it. But sometimes, as he sat with a simple sandwich and a cup of tea, he thought about the music he had left behind. He remembered the way applause had once filled a room, the warmth of people listening, the connection that came from sharing a song. After lunch, he returned to his duties, moving through classrooms as students changed lessons, the sound of their voices a background hum. He watched as a student struggled with a complicated math problem, as another carefully painted a picture for art class. Life moved on, day by day, class by class, and he moved with it, a silent observer, a gentle presence. Yet, deep inside, there was a longing he did not voice. He longed for the touch of keys under his fingers, for the music that could transform a room, that could reach hearts and stir emotions. It was a secret, a hidden world within the ordinary routine of sweeping and dusting. As the afternoon came, the janitor returned to the music room. It was empty now, the student having left after practice. He stood by the piano, running his fingers along the polished wood, feeling the familiar curves and edges. He had not touched the keys in years, but the memory was vivid. Slowly, carefully, he lifted his hands and let them fall on the keys. A single note rang out, pure and clear. He hesitated, afraid to break the silence of the empty room, but the sound was comforting, like meeting an old friend. Then, almost unconsciously, he played another note and another. The melody came slowly at first, hesitant, but then gained confidence. It was a simple tune, nothing grand, yet it was filled with life and feeling. He closed his eyes, letting the music flow, letting it remind him of who he had been and who he still was inside. The years of work, of responsibilities, of being unnoticed and overlooked, melted away with each note. He was not just a janitor in this moment. He was a musician, a storyteller, a man sharing a piece of his soul. Outside, students passed the music room, their chatter dying down as they heard the sound. They paused, curious, unsure where the music came from. Slowly, a few gathered at the doorway, peeking inside. They could not see who was playing, only the hands moving across the keys and the beautiful, unexpected sound filling the hall. Their eyes widened in surprise, their attention captured by the music. It was unlike anything they had heard before in their daily routines. The janitor played on, lost in the music. He did not notice the students at first, so absorbed in the melody that had not been touched in decades. Memories of past performances, of lost opportunities and abandoned dreams, came flooding back. Yet, instead of sadness, there was joy. Music had returned to him, unbidden, a gift from the quiet corners of his life. And for the first time in years, he felt fully alive. When the bell rang, signaling the end of the day, the janitor slowly lifted his hands from the keys. The students were still watching, amazed, their eyes wide with admiration and disbelief. They had never imagined that the quiet man they saw every day, the one who swept floors and fixed chairs, could create such beauty. Teachers soon came to see what had drawn the students' attention. They, too, were surprised, humbled, and a little ashamed that they had overlooked him for so long. The janitor smiled softly at the faces looking at him, a mixture of respect, awe, and curiosity. He did not speak of his past, nor did he explain how long he had played or why he had stopped. The music had said everything words could not. The students left slowly, carrying the memory of what they had heard, unsure if they would ever forget it. The janitor returned to his cart and his cleaning, moving quietly through the hallways once more, content in the knowledge that a small piece of himself had been shared, a secret revealed through the universal language of music. As the day ended and the last students left, he walked through the empty hallways, pausing once more by the music room. The piano gleamed softly under the dim lights, waiting, as it always had, for someone to play. He ran his fingers over the keys again, a gentle, almost invisible smile on his face. Life had been simple, ordinary, and full of unnoticed moments. Yet within those moments lay beauty, waiting patiently, ready to surprise those who took the time to see and listen. And sometimes the most extraordinary things hid in plain sight, in a 68-year-old janitor perched at a piano, playing a melody no one was ready for. After the morning routine, the janitor returned to the music room. He had been thinking about the student he had watched earlier, the way their small fingers struggled and then grew confident with each note. Something inside him stirred, a feeling he hadn't felt in decades. Music was no longer just a memory. It wanted to be alive again, even if only in these quiet moments. He sat at the piano, placing his hands gently on the keys. The wood felt smooth beneath his fingers, familiar and comforting. He began with a single note testing the air. Then another followed, and soon, a melody began to take shape. It was simple at first, hesitant, as if he were introducing himself to the keys again. But each note gained strength and the tune grew richer. The sound filled the room, spilling out into the hallway, touching ears and hearts in ways he could not have imagined. Students in the hall slowed down, their steps faltering as the music wrapped around them. They peered into the music room, trying to catch a glimpse of who was playing. At first, they thought it might be another student practicing. Then they noticed the hands, older and steady, moving across the keys with skill that left no room for doubt. The room fell silent as the realization spread. This was no ordinary player. The janitor did not see the students at first. He was completely absorbed, each note a brushstroke painting a story he had kept hidden for so long. He remembered the stages, the small concerts, the applause that once filled rooms like this one. Memories of long-forgotten friends and mentors came back, bittersweet and vivid. He played with emotion, letting the music speak the words he had never said, carrying both joy and longing. A small group of students gathered outside the door, mesmerized. They whispered among themselves, eyes wide in amazement. "Who is that?" one asked. Another shook their head, unable to believe the talent before them. They had passed him in the hall countless times, never imagining such depth existed in the quiet man they thought of only as the janitor. The music told a story they could feel but not yet understand. It was powerful and beautiful, something they had never expected to hear at school. Teachers, drawn by the unusual sound, began to enter the hall. Their steps slowed as they listened, curiosity giving way to astonishment. Many paused in the doorway, hesitant to interrupt, realizing that this was a rare moment. The janitor played on, unaware of the attention he had drawn. It was not for recognition or praise. It was for himself, a private joy rediscovered in the middle of an ordinary day. The melody grew more complex, weaving in memories from the past and present. It was playful at times, gentle at others, carrying both lightness and gravity. He remembered nights spent in music halls, practicing until his fingers ached, and the thrill of the first audience applause. Now, decades later, he could feel that same excitement, though quieter, gentler, more reflective. The piano had become his voice once again. Outside, the students leaned closer, unable to look away. They watched his fingers dance across the keys, precise and expressive. Some of them tried to identify the piece, but it was not something they had heard before. The music was alive, shaped by years of experience, emotion, and unseen talent. One of them whispered, "He's amazing," and the others nodded silently, eyes wide with wonder. For the first time, they saw him not as the janitor, not as someone who simply cleaned their classrooms, but as a person with a life, a passion, and a story they had never imagined. The janitor paused for a moment, letting a few notes hang in the air, soft and lingering. He took a deep breath, feeling the room around him vibrate with sound and energy. The silence of the hall was profound, broken only by the whispers of students and the faint hum of the school itself. Then, almost without warning, he began again, this time with a more spirited tune. It was lively and full of movement, playful in a way that brought smiles to the faces of those watching. The students could feel the joy, the years of practice hidden beneath the calm exterior, now pouring out in the form of music. Some of the students felt a stirring inside, a desire to touch a piano themselves, to try and create something that moved people the way this music did. They looked at one another, sharing glances filled with excitement and disbelief. The janitor continued, unaware that he was inspiring a whole new generation simply by playing for himself, for the music that had been waiting patiently inside him for decades. Teachers started talking quietly among themselves, astonished by the skill and emotion. They realized they had judged him too quickly, assuming that his age and job title limited him. They were wrong. Here was proof that talent does not fade with years, that passion can survive even the quietest of lives. Some felt a pang of regret for having overlooked him for so long, for not knowing the person behind the mop and broom. The janitor's eyes remained closed as he played, allowing the music to flow freely. Each chord, each note, carried fragments of memories. The friends who had played beside him, the mentors who had guided him, the long nights of practice that had shaped his hands and his heart. He played with both precision and emotion, a combination that can only come from years of dedication and love for the craft. He did not need recognition. The music was reward enough. Students whispered questions, trying to imagine his story. How long has he been playing? Did he go to concerts before? Why didn't we ever see this side of him before? They felt a mixture of awe and curiosity. The janitor had become a mystery to them, a living example that appearances can be deceiving. He had hidden a lifetime of skill and emotion behind a quiet demeanor, and now, in a few minutes, he had transformed the way they saw him. As the last notes of his lively piece faded, the room felt charged with energy. Silence settled, filled with a new kind of respect. The students stood frozen, not wanting to break the magic of the moment. Teachers looked on with admiration, quietly realizing that this was not just talent. It was a story of perseverance, of sacrifice, of passion that refused to be forgotten. The janitor opened his eyes and smiled faintly, a gentle acknowledgement of the presence around him, yet still humble, still unaware of the impact he had made. A student finally stepped forward, breaking the spell with a soft, almost hesitant, "That was incredible." Others nodded, still speechless, and the janitor simply nodded back, a humble gesture. He did not need their praise. The music had been enough. But he understood that they had seen him differently now, and that was enough for him as well. For a few moments, he felt the joy of connection, the power of music to bridge gaps and touch hearts. He rose from the piano and began to move toward his cleaning cart, returning to the routine that had always defined him. But something had changed. The students lingered, glancing back at him, carrying the memory of what they had witnessed. For them, the janitor was no longer invisible. He was extraordinary, a secret treasure hidden in plain sight. And for the janitor, the music had reminded him that even in a life of routine, there were moments of wonder, moments where he could share a part of himself and make a difference in ways he had never imagined. By the end of the day, the janitor had finished his rounds, the hallways quiet once again. Yet, the echoes of the music lingered in the school, in the minds of students and teachers alike. They would remember the day they discovered a hidden side of someone they thought they knew. And the janitor, quietly locking up the music room, felt a sense of contentment and fulfillment. The music was alive, and so was he, ready to return another day to the piano, to play not for applause, but for the love of the sound, for the joy of being fully, deeply alive. That evening, after the last student had left and the halls were empty, the janitor sat alone by the piano. The day's events played repeatedly in his mind. He could still hear the whispers, see the wide eyes, and feel the unspoken admiration that had followed him throughout the school. It was a strange feeling, one he had not expected, yet it was comforting and humbling. Music had always been private, a secret part of his life, but now it had been shared, even if only in fleeting moments. As he closed his eyes and let his fingers hover above the keys, memories returned vividly, memories of a life that had been paused for so long. He remembered the first time he had touched a piano, the excitement of discovering the patterns of black and white, the way the sound seemed to flow directly from his fingers to his heart. He recalled his youth, studying under strict yet kind instructors, practicing for hours in dimly lit rooms, learning the language of music. There were evenings spent performing in small gatherings, the thrill of applause, the feeling of connection with an audience that understood the language he spoke. But life had a way of interrupting dreams. Responsibilities, family obligations, and the need for steady work had pulled him away from the stage. Music became a quiet companion, a solace he could turn to in private, a friend that waited patiently for the right moment. He had never stopped loving it, never stopped feeling its pull, but he had set it aside, believing it was no longer his path. Yet, here he was, decades later, rediscovering it in a place that had seen his ordinary life unfold. He played softly, letting the notes remind him of who he had been and who he still was. The melody was gentle, reflective, carrying both the joy of creation and the weight of the years that had passed. Each chord was a memory, a story, a fragment of a life lived quietly but fully. The janitor felt a deep sense of satisfaction, the kind that comes from reconnecting with something essential, something that defines the very core of a person. Outside the music room, the students replayed what they had seen in their minds. The whispers of the extraordinary performance continued, spreading through the school like a ripple. They shared the story with friends, with classmates who had missed the moment, trying to capture the awe and inspiration they had felt. Some of them wondered if it was possible for someone to have such hidden talent and live a life so ordinary in everyone else's eyes. The idea was both humbling and motivating, showing them that appearances could be deceptive, that ordinary people could carry extraordinary stories. The janitor did not mind that he had been noticed. In fact, he found it quietly pleasing, though he did not seek the attention. What mattered was the connection the music had created, the way it had stirred something in those who heard it. He understood that talent was not just for the young or the famous. It could live quietly in the hearts of anyone willing to nurture it, even in the background of a life filled with routine and responsibility. As the evening progressed, he allowed his mind to drift through time, recalling moments of joy and struggle, of performance and practice. He remembered nights spent learning new pieces, struggling with difficult passages, and feeling the sweet victory of finally mastering them. He remembered the camaraderie of fellow musicians, the guidance of mentors, and the thrill of sharing music with those who truly listened. These memories were not bitter. They were rich and full, woven into the fabric of his life, giving depth to the years he had spent unseen. In his quiet reflections, he thought about the students. They were young, full of energy and potential, yet still discovering themselves and the world around them. He felt a sense of responsibility, a desire to share not just the music but the lessons embedded in it. Patience, dedication, and the importance of following one's passion, even when life makes it difficult. He realized that teaching did not always need a formal setting. Sometimes inspiration came from the simplest acts, like a melody played at the right moment, touching hearts and opening minds. The janitor began to play again, this time with a more deliberate intention. He explored the piano's full range, letting his fingers move freely, combining technique with emotion. Each note was a story, each phrase a sentence in a narrative that had waited decades to be spoken. He played for himself, for the joy of creation, but also for the invisible audience that had already heard him, carrying a message that life could be full of surprises, and that hidden talents could shine when least expected. Outside, a few students lingered near the music room, drawn back by the sound. They listened quietly, unsure if they should interrupt or simply enjoy the moment. Some whispered to each other, marveling at the depth of feeling in the music. The janitor's playing was no longer just a display of skill. It was a demonstration of living fully, embracing both past and present, and connecting with others without a single word. It was a lesson in humility, in passion, and in the quiet power of dedication. Time seemed to stretch, each note lingering longer than it should, filling the room with a sense of presence and purpose. The janitor played a variety of pieces, some joyful and playful, others somber and reflective. He allowed the music to carry his emotions, to speak the words he had held inside for so long. The keys responded obediently, each one resonating with the weight and beauty of a life rich in experience, even if that life had been mostly unseen by others. Eventually, he paused, letting silence take its place. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what might come next. He took a deep breath, feeling both exhaustion and exhilaration. The music had given him something he had not realized he had missed so deeply. The sense of being fully alive, fully engaged, and fully connected to the world, even in the quiet of an empty school. The students, too, were changed. They had witnessed something extraordinary, something that defied their expectations and challenged their assumptions. They realized that the janitor, whom they had overlooked and underestimated, had a life and a story that were far more complex and inspiring than they could have imagined. They carried this lesson forward, understanding that the world was full of hidden depths, waiting to be discovered by those willing to look and listen. The janitor rose from the piano, feeling a quiet satisfaction. He returned to his cleaning duties, moving through the hallways with the same care and attention as before, but now with a renewed sense of purpose. The music had reminded him of who he was, of the passions that had never left him, and of the impact he could have on others, even without words or formal recognition. He felt a gentle pride, the kind that comes from reconnecting with a long-lost part of oneself and sharing it, however quietly, with the world. As the night settled over the school, he made his way to the staff room, reflecting on the day and the events that had unfolded. He understood that life was full of hidden moments, of unexpected connections, and that sometimes the simplest actions could create profound experiences. Music had been his companion, his solace, and now it had become his bridge to others, connecting him to the students and teachers in ways he had never anticipated. He sat quietly, thinking about the days ahead, wondering if he would play again for the students, if he would continue to let the music flow through him, or if he would return to the quiet solitude that had defined so much of his life. He knew one thing for certain. The music was not gone, it was alive, and it had found a place in the hearts of those who had listened. And for the janitor, that was enough. It was a reminder that talent, passion, and beauty could exist quietly, waiting for the right moment to emerge and touch the lives of those who were ready to see it. Finally, he stood, stretched, and prepared to leave the empty school. The piano remained, silent for now, but waiting for hands that would bring it to life once more, waiting for music to fill the halls, and waiting for the moments that would inspire, surprise, and connect. The janitor left with a soft smile, carrying a sense of peace, joy, and anticipation for what the next day might bring, knowing that life could always surprise, and that even in the quietest corners, extraordinary things could happen. The next morning, the janitor arrived at the school earlier than usual. The memory of the previous day's events was still fresh in his mind, and he could feel a quiet excitement in the air, though nothing had been said openly. As he walked down the hallways, he noticed a few students glancing at him differently, their eyes filled with curiosity and a hint of respect. Some whispered to each other, as if trying to decide how to approach someone they had never really understood before. He pushed his cart slowly, taking in the usual sights. The polished floors, the organized classrooms, the posters on the walls, and the soft hum of life beginning to stir in the school. Everything seemed ordinary, yet he could sense a subtle shift. The music he had played yesterday had left a ripple, and he was quietly aware of its effect. It was a strange feeling, to be noticed not for work, but for a talent that had remained hidden for decades in the music room. The piano stood waiting, polished and gleaming. The janitor approached it carefully, almost reverently, as if acknowledging a trusted friend. He ran his fingers lightly over the keys, feeling their smoothness and remembering the sounds that had filled the hall the day before. He began to play a few notes softly, testing the melody in his mind before letting it flow naturally. The sound was gentle but carried an undeniable presence, filling the room and spilling slightly into the hallway. Students began to arrive, drawn by the familiar sound. They gathered quietly outside the music room, unsure if they should enter or simply listen from a distance. Whispers passed among them, their excitement barely contained. "Did you hear that?" one asked. "Yes, it's amazing," another replied. They shared glances, wide-eyed and in awe. They had expected a routine day at school, but instead, they were witnessing something extraordinary. The janitor continued playing, lost in the music. His mind drifted to the students who had watched him yesterday, wondering if they had thought about what they had seen. He did not know, and he did not need to. The music was for himself first, a joy rediscovered, a connection to a life that had been paused for too long. Yet, he could feel the presence of others, the way the notes reached beyond the walls of the music room and touched lives silently but profoundly. Teachers began to notice as well. Some paused in the hallway, listening with quiet astonishment. They had always known him as the janitor, a reliable and humble presence in the school. They had not expected him to hold such depth, such skill, such emotion. The music reminded them that people carried entire worlds within themselves, worlds that could remain hidden until the right moment. Some of the teachers exchanged glances, quietly discussing what they were hearing, and for the first time, they began to see the janitor in a new light. The students outside the music room grew bolder, inching closer to the doorway, fascinated by what they were witnessing. They could see his hands moving gracefully over the keys, precise and confident. There was a story in every note, a life lived in both joy and struggle, and they were witnessing it unfold before them. Their admiration grew with each passing minute, a mixture of awe, respect, and curiosity. It was not just the music. It was the humanity in it, the experience, the dedication, and the quiet pride that shone through despite his humility. After a while, the janitor stopped and let the last note linger in the air. He opened his eyes, and for the first time, he noticed the small crowd that had gathered. The students looked at him with wide eyes, and the teachers with expressions that mixed surprise, admiration, and reflection. The moment was silent, yet full of meaning. He nodded gently, acknowledging their presence without speaking, letting the music convey the connection that words could not. One student, braver than the others, stepped forward and asked softly, Could you teach us a little?" The question hung in the air, sincere and respectful. The janitor paused, considering. He had not thought of teaching. His life had been too quiet, his routine too established. Yet, the request felt natural, like an invitation to share not just the music, but the lessons it carried. He smiled, a gentle, humble smile, and nodded. "Yes," he said softly, "I can do that." Word spread quickly throughout the school. Soon, students from different grades began to stop by, curious to learn from the janitor, whose music had surprised them all. He welcomed them quietly, showing patience and care. He guided their fingers, demonstrated techniques, and encouraged them to feel the music rather than just play the notes. His teaching style was calm, gentle, and deeply personal, reflecting years of experience not just in playing, but in understanding the connection between the music and the human spirit. The students began to change. They approached their lessons with renewed focus, motivated not only by the skill he shared, but by the passion and life experience that infused every note he played. They learned to listen, to observe, and to appreciate the subtlety and depth in music. And more than that, they began to see the janitor differently. He was no longer invisible or ordinary. He was a mentor, a guide, and an inspiration. They realized that knowledge and talent could exist in the most unexpected places, waiting to be discovered by those willing to look. Teachers observed quietly, some joining in the lessons, intrigued by the method and depth of understanding the janitor brought to his teaching. They marveled at the subtle ways he connected with the students, nurturing their curiosity and encouraging them to explore. The music room became a space not just for notes and practice, but for growth, reflection, and inspiration. It was a living reminder that education was not just about textbooks and tests, but about discovery, connection, and the unlocking of hidden potential. As days passed, the school's atmosphere began to shift. Students were more attentive, more respectful, and more engaged. They carried the lessons beyond the music room, applying the patience, focus, and appreciation they had learned to other subjects and activities. The janitor continued his daily routine, sweeping floors, polishing desks, and tidying classrooms, but his presence was no longer unnoticed. There was a quiet reverence, a sense of understanding that he was more than he appeared. He had become a symbol of hidden talent, dedication, and the power of quietly pursuing one's passion. One afternoon, the janitor paused in the hallway, watching a group of students practice a new piece. Their fingers stumbled at times, but he encouraged them gently, offering advice and support. He watched them grow, each small success a triumph in his eyes. He realized that teaching was another form of music, another way to create harmony, not just through sound, but through connection and guidance. He felt fulfillment, a sense of purpose that complemented the joy he found in playing. Teachers and students alike began to speak of the janitor with newfound respect. They shared stories of his music, of the quiet lessons, and of the inspiration he provided. The school had been changed subtly, but profoundly, by his presence. He had reminded everyone that extraordinary talent and life experience could exist quietly, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. And through his willingness to share, even in small ways, he had created a ripple that touched everyone around him. As the week came to a close, the janitor returned to the music room one last time before leaving. He sat at the piano, fingers hovering above the keys, reflecting on the past few days. He had shared a part of himself that had been hidden for decades, and in doing so, he had touched lives, inspired minds, and reminded the school of the beauty of dedication, passion, and humility. The music was no longer just for him. It had become a bridge, connecting him to the students and teachers in ways he had never imagined. He played softly, a final piece for the day, letting the notes carry gratitude, joy, and quiet pride. The school was empty, but he could feel the echoes of learning, admiration, and inspiration lingering in the hallways. The janitor rose, straightened his uniform, and left the music room with a calm, contented smile. He knew that life had a way of surprising even the quietest of people, and that sometimes the smallest actions could create the most profound impact. The students, the teachers, and even the empty halls had been touched by something extraordinary, and for the janitor that was enough. The day of the student recital finally arrived. The school hall buzzed with excitement and nervous energy. Students adjusted their instruments, teachers shuffled papers and checked schedules, and parents whispered among themselves. The janitor arrived early, as always, quietly observing the activity from a distance. The piano, the very instrument that had changed the perception of so many, gleamed under the lights, waiting patiently for the music that would soon fill the hall. As the students began to perform, one by one, the audience applauded politely, appreciating the effort but not expecting anything extraordinary. Yet, there was an undercurrent of anticipation, a quiet curiosity that had grown over the past week. Whispers of the janitor's talent had spread, and some students and teachers found themselves glancing toward the music room door, wondering if the man they had overlooked could surprise them again. The recital proceeded smoothly, with young musicians playing pieces they had practiced for weeks. Each performance was met with polite applause, the kind that encourages but does not overwhelm. The janitor watched quietly, a subtle smile on his face. He felt pride for the students, seeing their effort and growth, knowing that the music room had become a place of learning, discovery, and inspiration. He had seen their curiosity and dedication develop, and it filled him with a sense of quiet fulfillment. Then it was time. One of the teachers called him forward, explaining to the audience that there was someone extraordinary who wanted to share a special performance. The janitor stepped onto the stage slowly, acknowledging the audience with a humble nod. There were murmurs of surprise and curiosity, but no one expected the depth and emotion that were about to unfold. He approached the piano, running his fingers lightly over the keys. The room fell silent, the air heavy with anticipation. He began with a simple melody, soft and reflective, capturing the attention of everyone present. The notes flowed smoothly, filled with emotion and experience, a story told without words. The audience listened intently, mesmerized by the unexpected brilliance emerging from a man they had always seen as ordinary. As he played, memories of the past came alive for him. He thought of the long nights of practice, the years spent mastering techniques, and the joy of performing for those who understood the language of music. Each note carried fragments of his life, the struggles, the sacrifices, the triumphs, and the quiet moments of reflection. The hall was transformed, no longer just a place for a school recital, but a space where a life's passion and dedication resonated with every listener. Students in the audience were spellbound. They had watched him teach them, had seen glimpses of his skill, but witnessing him perform fully was an entirely different experience. Their eyes widened with admiration, and some whispered to each other, unable to believe what they were hearing. Teachers looked on in awe, silently acknowledging the depth of talent and life experience that had been hidden in plain sight. The janitor's performance was not just a display of skill. It was a lesson in humility, dedication, and the enduring power of passion. The music grew in complexity, moving through playful passages, reflective melodies, and uplifting sequences that filled the hall with life. The janitor played with a combination of precision and emotion that only decades of practice and experience could produce. Every note seemed to carry a message, connecting him to the audience in a way words never could. Parents, students, and teachers alike felt the impact, their hearts touched by the unexpected beauty and depth. When he finished, the hall remained silent for a moment, holding the resonance of the last note. Then, as if awakened from a shared dream, the audience erupted into applause. Clapping, cheering, and expressions of astonishment filled the room. The janitor smiled gently, acknowledging their appreciation, but his satisfaction came from a deeper place. He had shared a part of himself, a hidden lifetime of passion, and it had been received with understanding and respect. After the applause subsided, students approached him one by one, expressing admiration and curiosity. Some asked about the techniques he had used, others wanted to know more about his experiences and stories from the past. He answered patiently, with warmth and humility, sharing not just technical knowledge but the emotions and dedication behind the music. The students listened eagerly, absorbing every word, inspired not just by the notes, but by the man who had quietly transformed their perception of what was possible. Teachers also came forward, expressing their surprise and respect. They had underestimated him, assumed he was just another part of the background, someone who kept the school clean and unnoticed. Now, they realized that life's extraordinary moments often came from unexpected places, and that every person carried stories and talents that could inspire and teach. The janitor had become a living example of this truth, reminding everyone that appearances could be deceiving, and that hidden potential could shine brilliantly when given a chance. The performance became a turning point for the school. Students who had once ignored or overlooked him now sought his guidance, eager to learn and explore music more deeply. The music room was no longer just a practice space. It became a hub of inspiration, curiosity, and creativity. Lessons extended beyond piano techniques, incorporating life lessons about patience, passion, and perseverance. The janitor's quiet presence had become a symbol of dedication and resilience, influencing everyone around him in subtle yet profound ways. In the weeks that followed, the janitor continued to teach and play, both for himself and for those who sought to learn. The students grew more confident, their skills developing under his patient guidance. They carried the lessons beyond the music room, applying the discipline and focus they had learned to other areas of their lives. The school culture subtly shifted, with a newfound appreciation for the quiet, often overlooked individuals whose talents and experiences enriched the community. The janitor, despite the recognition and admiration, remained humble. He continued his daily routine, sweeping floors, tidying classrooms, and moving through the hallways with quiet dignity. Yet, he carried a renewed sense of purpose and fulfillment, knowing that his passion had not only been rekindled, but had touched the lives of others. Music had become more than a private solace. It was a bridge connecting him to the students, teachers, and the larger school community. One afternoon, as he sat by the piano, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. He thought of the years spent quietly, of the responsibilities that had kept him from performing publicly, and of the patience and resilience that had shaped his character. He realized that life had a way of bringing extraordinary moments, even in the midst of routine and ordinary days. The music, the students, and the shared experiences had created a legacy far beyond what he had imagined. The janitor played a soft, reflective melody, each note resonating with gratitude and joy. The empty hall seemed to listen, carrying the echoes of his life, his experiences, and the lessons he had shared. He knew that the impact of his music would endure, not just in the technical skills he had taught, but in the inspiration and courage he had instilled. Students would remember, teachers would reflect, and the school would carry a quiet understanding that hidden talents and untold stories could transform lives when given a chance. As the day ended and the hall emptied, the janitor quietly closed the piano lid. He walked through the hallways, observing the subtle changes. Students sharing smiles and encouragement, teachers nodding with appreciation, and a sense of community strengthened by shared respect and admiration. The piano had been more than an instrument. It had become a symbol of hope, connection, and the enduring power of passion. He left the school that evening with a gentle smile, feeling content and at peace. Life had given him a chance to share what he loved, to inspire others, and to reconnect with a part of himself that had been waiting patiently for decades. He understood that greatness did not always come from fame or recognition, but from quiet dedication, resilience, and the willingness to embrace one's true passions. And so, the 68-year-old janitor who once moved through the school unnoticed had left a lasting mark, not only on the piano but on the hearts and minds of everyone who had witnessed his extraordinary gift.